This week on Media Delta, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. Can't really think of a fun intro? Buckle up, folks. We're in for a depressing movie. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Media Delta. We got an interesting one because I'm not going to lie, I kind of twisted some rules in order to kind of even justify this. Because I felt like this movie, it's not explicitly tied to a video game, but there are a number of factors that I feel um, warrant us discussing this film here. First off, is that it is the direct link to this that I at least have is that a while ago, I think like really early on, we took a look at a game called International Karate for the Commodore 64. Rob Hubbard, the composer of that, kind of wholesale lifted the theme for this movie to use in that game, which is the direct tie, or probably the closest direct tie. Another tie is the fact that we took a look at Takeshi's Challenge, and Beat Takeshi is not someone who is be rather familiar unless you're like really into Japanese cinema over here. So this is a movie that stars. He's just referred to as Takeshi here, but it is Beat Takeshi. Another person that is actually involved in this movie that I do feel is actually close enough of a tie to this is Ryuichi Sakamoto, who was the composer of the music for this movie, but also played a very vital character. He was the actor who played Captain Yunoi, who is a very pivotal character in this movie. Also, so this is coming, like, we're recording this in June, and also it's coming out in June, which is Pride Month. And if you're looking for movies that are somehow related to video games that we've done that have any sort of connection to that, uh, pickings are incredibly slim. Um, so yeah, even though this doesn't exactly end the happiest for that kind of thing, it is still a movie that does have very heavy OBT or very heavy pride themes. So in terms of like uh, tackling one's thoughts, so I felt like that was somewhat appropriate. I guess I know it's weird, but I didn't exactly have a whole lot to work with, and I wanted to do something. Um, but yes, also it's just another. It's also kind of our introduction to Japanese cinema, which is something that I feel that it's something interesting that we wouldn't normally get to talk about a lot. So I felt like in terms of I guess cultural look at, I felt that was something worth taking a look at. But yes, enough babbling on about that. I was not the only one who watched this. So please introduce yourself in alphabetical order.
Hi, I'm Axe, and I'm here for all David Bowie.
Hello, I'm Real Civil Bear. I'm here for the ride.
Hi, I'm Torpid Typist, and I'm here to fight the gay thoughts.
Yes. So this movie, despite the title, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, this is a movie that technically takes place on Christmas during a certain part of it. But it is very much a movie that takes place in a Japanese POW camp. And it is not, let's just say it doesn't sugarcoat various things. Right off the bat, I will say this movie is probably one of the heaviest things that we'd ever take a look at on this show. Like the first thing you come off, like the very like not the very first scene, but like one of the very first scenes is a scene of like two I don't know if prisoners are the right word, but basically two people being like attacked by guards because of an incident involving a they don't exactly go well, it's basically two prisoners engage in some sort of activity and they are going
They're pretty blatant about it.
yeah
Basically, it wasn't two prisoners. It was a prisoner and a guard at the camp.
Yep.
The prisoner was Dutch, and basically the Dutch prisoner and the guard were fucking.
Yeah.
And they
Pretty
I'm
got
much.
proud
caught.
about it, damn it.
Yes.
And so they got caught, and were essentially beat to shit. And the guard was told to commit suicide.
Yep.
Yeah, but like that, like suicide was a bit. Like the entire incident was really haphazard because they drag in another character, Lawrence, there, and the person who's ordering the execution or the ritual suicide doesn't really have the authority to do it. So he tries to do it before the captain appears. So it's kind of just like all over the place.
Yeah. Um, yeah, just to give you a taste of what this movie's kind of about, that is like one of the very first things you see, like in the first like 5 or 10 minutes of this movie. Um, so if you're going into this thinking that it's something that is light, it is most definitely not. Um, so be warned about that. But
It is a Christmas movie.
it is a Christmas movie.
A double Christmas movie.
Yep.
Yes.
You get 2 Christmases for the price of 1.
Yep.
Indeed.
Yeah. So yeah, I think to kind of go into before we just spend the time just going over the plot, I think we should probably get into the questions and actually kind of get more on track. So, first question, Axe. What were your general impressions? Is there any particular elements you'd like to bring up?
So gonna be honest, this had the same problem that Hunt for Red October did. It was way too long, and it drags on. Um, there are a few scenes that caught my interest, and I paid attention throughout most of the film. But then there were scenes like him having flashbacks to when he was a kid and with his brother, and I legit skipped over them because I didn't care about that. I cared about the main story. Um, it was a little frustrating to watch because there was a lot of moments that felt like just padding. I didn't need to see Bowie go on trial. Just bring him to the POW camp and have us see that. That's kind of the whole story, really. Just
I
a lot
mean,
of
the idea of the trial was that was supposed to be where him and the captain met.
mm. But it's fair. It's just even still, just watching it, it felt like it didn't need to be there.
Yeah, I guess it was just like sort of this establishing moment of the relationship that would go on between these two.
Yeah.
Also, one thing that I should do as kind of an asterisk to that, because I do feel like that's definitely a valid complaint. But one thing that might be a reason why they did that, this movie is actually based on 2 books
Right.
that were written by Lawrence. It's a Dutch name. Or actually, no, it's South African. It's Lawrence Venderpost, I think. That'd be close to 100. Probably not, but it's his books, which he was an actual POW during World War II. And his books, The Seed and the Sower and The Night of the New Moon, are basically his kind of books that he wrote that basically kind of recounted his kind of experiences in that POW camp. So I feel like that's something that it's like, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened.
Yeah,
that-
it's something to take into account. I also want to freely admit that the version I watched didn't have subtitles, so I was lost in
Yeah.
a lot of scenes. So I'm taking those things into account with my criticisms, but there's still definitely scenes that weren't needed. I felt.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, the flashback was definitely like way too drawn out, even though
Yeah.
I understand the point of it, but
Both of them were. Both of them were way too
Yeah.
drawn out. That second flashback, I kind of understood because he's dying and this is him kind of like reliving certain things. So it had better context there, but the first one was him retelling to Lawrence about what is
how he
the
stabbed his brother in the back.
yeah, basically. So but even
And how
still
they
it's,
never reconcile because of it.
yeah.
Because the way that I see, like, because just to kind of go over the layout of that scene, basically, that entire flashback is a view of Jack and his brother at church singing. Basically, then him getting beat up by a group of bullies who,
Because he has a
the li-
hunchback and also he has the voice of an angel, to put it nicely.
Yeah.
yes, and then basically then there's a scene in the bedroom, and then it's a scene of him in the school, and then it's basically the thing that is him getting stabbed in the back. I feel like rather than going to A to B to C to D E, you could have just done D and E.
Yeah,
I,
we
I,
didn't need all that build up.
I think what might factor into that is that a lot of movies like in like between like the 50s and like 80s that were based on novels and books didn't really skimp on runtime. Like I don't know, like the Gone with the Wind, I think is like also like really long. Like Russian movies based on like Russian novels are also really long. So that probably could have influenced that because it's not really like today where you adapt something like Lord of the Rings and then you have to take into account, well, we're going to market this to the cinema. Nobody wants to stay in the cinema this long, and then we're going to do the extended version for home release. So I think like that has to do as well with the length and lack of editing.
Yeah, that could also be. I am actually taking a look at the because Wikipedia is nice about it, and actually the director of this movie is Nagisa. Let's see, I believe it's Nagisa Oshima. Um, he basically he had a very long career in film. Started out in the late 50s, going all the way up to 99. And I'm looking; they actually list his runtimes, and it's actually kind of interesting. Is that this is his second longest movie. A lot of his other movies are like an hour and a half. Like they're on the 100-minute range, whereas this is 123 minutes.
I think it's also because like there's nothing really that happens in this movie like plot wise. Like you can kind of like you can just do a bullet point of the plot list, uh, like they're like pretty short. A lot of it is really just giving context to characters and um, character development interactions more than anything.
And it's not like it's weird because it's kind of parallel to Hunt for Red October. Hunt for Red October, there's just a little more to the movie than just the conversations. The conversations drove the movie for sure, but there was a lot more happening. There's a lot of different characters, different situations, conversations. Whereas Mr. Lawrence really focuses on four specific characters, and their scenes are very long. It's not a lot of cutting to different scenes. It's very long scenes, so it does get a little exhausting. As far as a particular element, I'd like to bring up. Honestly, I had one and I kind of lost it in the shuffle of starting the episode, but just the underlying themes of the film, I guess, would be a particular element. It does have a lot of subtext to it, and it is a smart film. Just ran a bit long.
Yeah.
It is a little bit long in the tooth, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've got.
Okay. Bear.
Yeah, I in general like the movie. I do think I agree with X. That is a bit on the long side, but it's not really the runtime that bothered me. I think the part that bothered me is like it requires a lot of focus. Because this is the second time I watched the movie, and it feel like I was watching it all over again. Simply because of how slow and like the pacing is a bit of a slog, but I don't mean like a slog in a negative sense. I kind of see why they made it a slog because it's like this daily life in a war camp, and in general, the atmosphere is meant to be oppressive, like a bit more oppressive. So I kind of get why it feels the way it does. The part that I like though is I really like the criticism of uh, World War II Japan, but in a way that it tries to contextualize it. Um, so for example, there were like there was one scene where um, when they got upset and they ordered everybody like no food for 48 hours, and the British officer that was kind of like in charge of the the, the POWs, Hixley, he's kind of like why the hell do we have to not eat anything for 2 days? And Lawrence was like, well, it's because they're not going to be eating anything for 2 days as well, referring to the Japanese. so they expect the same thing from us. So it has like these kind of like moments where Lawrence tries to not justify but explain like this is how they're thinking. Um, and it's kind of like, well, the POWs for one, they don't care because they're POWs, because like why would they have any sympathy or empathy towards their captors? And the Japanese don't care what the POWs think because for them it's a matter of fact. Like when Hara talks about like suicide and how Lawrence is probably too much of a coward to take his own life, whereas Lawrence says like, well, in the West, for us that is the coward's way out, to take your own life. And Lawrence kind of tries to always be this intermediary where he's trying where he kind of like understands where the Japanese are coming from, where their beliefs come from, and like how their culture shaped it. Uh, but he doesn't use it to justify it to Huxley or anybody else. He uses it more to just say like this is how they work, this is how they think, and how they function. Um, More so as like a warning to not like step on anybody's toes, but also just like I think he gets frustrated that there's this cultural barrier and there even is a war going on.
Yeah, there's a scene where you can see that even Lawrence has his limit to getting frustrated with their Japanese kind of methodology. There is a scene in which basically I believe it's Lawrence and Salyers are going to be executed for smuggling in a radio into the camp. And basically, Lawrence has this conversation with Hara, um, basically saying why, like, they don't have any proof that he did it. Um, why are they executing him? The thing, and basically, Hara
Also,
was
that
basically
wasn't with
saying,
Hara. That was with
"Oops,
Yanoi.
yeah, no, I sorry,
It was
yeah,
the other one
yeah."
saying
Hara
that.
was there, like, not even paying attention. It's actually a pretty like neat scene. But basically, Lawrence flips out at Yanoi while he's having this funeral for a guard that actually committed suicide the night before. Due
Also,
to
after uh, Lawrence can barely sit at all because he just got beat to shit by the
yeah,
guards.
Yeah, like the main point of that was that Yonois basically said, "I would rather execute someone to maintain order rather than execute the right person that committed the crime." So he was basically like, "Yeah, I can't. If we don't know who actually did it, I'm gonna execute you because you're the prime suspect because that sends a message." And like to Yonoi, that makes complete sense, but to Lawrence, like that's kind of like interesting to see that limit where to Lawrence he understands that makes sense to Yonoi, but to him it's just like ridiculous.
yeah,
So I think that was probably one of my most interesting things. This is why I also asked when we were doing this movie, like, hey, was this actually like a Japanese director or Japanese production? And like, yeah, this is mostly like a Japanese
yep,
production. So that's why I thought it was uh, so interesting how it was framed. Like it's not both sides. It's not something like that. It's more like no, this kind of line of thinking was toxic and bullshit. But here's why it existed. Here's why that line of thinking was there and what the reasoning behind it was.
yeah, um, yeah, because it is definitely directed by a Japanese person, produced by Jeremy Thomas. So you got someone, I believe he is British. Yes, he is. It is basically it's Japanese British. Seems to be the split. Um, Screenplay was written both by the director and Paul Mayersberg, who is also British. So, yeah, it is a pretty. It seems like some of the technical stuff is more on the Japanese side, but it is Japanese British film. It's not solely one or the other.
Yeah, but you don't really like see um like you don't really see the POWs in like any well like you don't see them like in a good light or like a terrible light. Like they're prisoners of war and they have some uh like bigoted opinions and whatnot, but it's not like, oh, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. It's just kind of like it's a shitty situation. And you don't feel like it's trying to like a pick an angle or pick a side. That's kind of like why I like it. Basically goes like, yeah, the Japanese in World War II were kind of crap, but here's like a lot of context around that.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
that is definitely one thing that I really appreciate about this movie.
It's interesting too because it doesn't even like seem to really overly judge who is essentially the antagonist.
Yeah,
It-
yeah, because it's just like character dynamics. I think that also kind of contributes towards how long the movie feels because you don't really have an antagonistic force because it's not like here's the villain, here's the hero. It's literally just character dynamics stretched out over 2 hours.
Yeah, it's like even by antagonist I mean Yanoi because he's the closest thing this movie has to one. And he is also largely responsible for the madness going on in the camp because he can't reconcile his own emotions. He just doesn't know what to do and ends up kind of losing it because of that.
Yeah.
Up until the very end when he realizes what he did and it's too late.
Yep. So are you good for that, Bear?
Yeah, that's all from my end.
All right, Turbo.
I really, really like this movie. I think it's a really fucking good movie and really interesting. And I actually really like all the character interaction. And yeah, it's definitely a bit to take in. And there are certain scenes that definitely run too much. Like the childhood thing could have been kept to a simple conversation, and the point would have gotten across. If I'm going to be honest, uh, but overall, I think it's really enjoyable. And I barely noticed the length, honestly, because I'm so wrapped up in what's going on and what everyone's talking about and all that. Uh, that said, something I like to point out is it's been lightly touched on, but the relationship between Hara and Lawrence is probably one of the most interesting things to me. Because Hara and Lawrence aren't directly related to the madness going on in the camp. It's more like they're sort of almost a third party observer. Because specifically, it's mostly related to uh, Bowie's character in Yanoi. And so these two are just watching what's going on and trying their best to handle it in what ways they can. And it's interesting too because once again, it's very important to note that Lawrence is a POW. He is there as a prisoner of war, but him and particularly Hara tend to get along and have all these discussions of culture, like this cultural exchange of ideas in what people assume to be true and what have you. While this is going on, because essentially Lawrence is elevated above the other POWs because he can speak Japanese, and this allows him to listen to them, understand, and also mediate. And it's part of what's really interesting. And so Hara and him tend to go back and forth about like their culture's views on certain things like suicide or homosexuality. Like how Lawrence gets really, really uncomfortable when discussing it, and whereas like Hara is a bit more open about discussing it, and how saying like how the samurai were much more all right with it, whereas Lawrence is saying like homosexuality is a bad thing and all that, and it's
Yeah,
it's hmm?
yeah, I did like Lawrence. Like you can kind of see him ping pong between Hara and Huxley in the sense of like you said he's elevated and he can kind of that's how he gets close to Hara. But when he gets too close, when he crosses the line in terms of like oversteps his boundaries, so to say, they give him pushback. They basically remind him, "Hey, you're still a prisoner here." And on the other end of it, you see him. He's basically like there protecting the interests of like the POWs, but also like via Huxley, you kind of see that they're kind of mistrusting of him because they're kind of like oh you're too sympathetic towards these Japanese. Like I don't know what you're on about.
Especially for someone like Hicksley who's big on like grand empty gestures and asking the world of these Japanese while not trying to understand them.
I mean, he is the only one who's still wearing his officer hat in the entire like camp.
Yeah. But so I really really enjoy the dynamic between the two of them to the point where at one point Hara essentially gets really plastered and sentences someone, specifically I think it was a Chinese POW, to take the fall for that radio transmitter so Lawrence can live, and even starts yelling that he's Santa and has the first Merry Christmas Lawrence of the movie.
Yep.
And then once again at the very end, the part that kills me is it's uttered a second time after Lawrence and Hara have a discussion because Hara's been taken in and is going to be executed for war crimes, essentially. And they have this discussion, and you hear Lawrence genuinely losing it because he feels that Hara shouldn't hang for this. He was just essentially raised this way and to think this way, and he was a soldier doing what he was told.
Well, it's kind of the thing where Lawrence knows that like Hara actually says like they're gonna execute me or I'm gonna die tomorrow, and I don't know why.
Yeah,
Basically, he was just like he was just doing the things you do in war, and Lawrence gets like annoyed at that because like yeah you didn't know better. It makes no sense that you're gonna hang simply because the other side said so. But and he knows that Hara just like yeah this is beyond like Hara like cannot put himself like distance himself from the entire situation, kind of observe it and see like oh I did a ton of shit because he just cannot perceive it that way.
yeah. This is all genuinely built foreign to him, and it's a really really good scene.
It's,
And
it's
this is all.
actually it's actually interesting to view like if you view some of the like there's like a few documentaries about post World War II Japan and how like various officials and generals were put on trial, and it's kind of like interesting to see when they are put on trial by like the Allies, how a lot of them just like have to be told exactly what to say because they don't understand what they did wrong in the war. So that's kind of like actually like does mirror like a mentality that did exist post World War II.
Yeah, and it just really shows how in deep Lawrence got learning these things and just his relationship with Hara in general.
Well, the other thing with horror too is if you pay close attention to him throughout the movie, you could tell there's a reluctance in him to some of the stuff that he's doing, but it's not necessarily because he knows it's wrong. It's just he what's the there's that one scene where he admits that he let the both of them go, and the way he carries himself in that scene, it's this very timid, like he's just following orders. He's just there doing what he's being told to do. And the one good thing that he does, the right thing that he does, he sees as wrong because it's contradictory to what he's been taught and told. And there's little bits like that throughout the film that sort of lead up to that final scene where he asks, what did I do different? Why am I being, you know, punished?
Get punished for being a soldier, yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't like at the start of the movie, I might be misremembering, but wasn't like his entire logic of it forcing the guy at the start to commit seppuku, like the Japanese soldier, so that he could basically fake that he didn't commit suicide, so that his family would still get
That I believe.
insurance or pension or
I
whatever.
believe.
Because
Good.
I mean, I think it was something like that, and that's why he didn't want to get the captain involved because if if he was involved, then it would become more official, and then so ritual suicide doesn't cover like that pension that goes to the family.
So what that was when the guard who basically interfered with Yanoi freeing Sellers in the
Mhm.
middle of the movie. That is when they bring that up. It's during the funeral scene.
Yeah, but I think was that also at the start, or am I misremembering? Because I think it was also
Also, it
something
was
else.
Yanoi who was talking specifically about the pension.
Okay, I might misremember that
And
then.
also because Lawrence was going to die, he mentioned that Lawrence would also be getting one, and he'd make sure of that because the papers have been sent through.
Mhm.
Also, it's important to note that that soldier who died, the guard at the camp, died because he attempted to kill David Bowie's character because he could tell that Yanoi was genuinely disturbed by David Bowie. But once again, didn't quite know why. But it was Bowie's character and the way he was essentially spitting in Yanoi's eye were largely responsible for everything that went down in the camp.
Please call him Sellers. Nobody would actually,
Celliers.
yeah,
Excuse me.
nobody would actually want to kill David Bowie.
It's true. I mean, though I can understand falling for Bowie,
Okay, Phantom
Yep.
Limb begs to differ.
but I got it. I get it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Venture Brothers is good. But
Eh,
it was
it
at
aged
points.
badly, but yes.
Yeah, certain seasons have aged a lot better than others,
Mm.
but regardless, yeah, no, essentially he could tell that something about Celliers was disturbing Inouye, and he tried to kill him, and then failed after Celliers essentially knocked him out, stole his key, and fucking tried to book it.
Yeah.
So he ended up committing ritual suicide because of it, because he got caught.
Yeah.
And he's planning on from the start too, which he mentions for his transgressions, but
Hmm.
also highlighting that sort of mentality.
Yeah. So you good?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I really like this movie. I will fully admit that it is a bit of a slow burn. The way that I kind of view it, like movies like these, I will fully admit that they're slow, but they are very. I feel that they are very fulfilling. The kind of analogy that I think of is that they're kind of akin to say something like Lobster, which is in I admit I put an asterisk on this metaphor because I've never actually had lobster, but it's the thing that I've heard described of it, which is basically that it is very rich, in that you don't want to eat it fast because you'll
They're
get sick that
liars.
way.
Whoever told you is a fucking liar.
Okay, I'm thinking.
I will stuff my goddamn face with
Okay,
lobster nonstop.
basically, it is something that you're not supposed like something very thick, that you're supposed to kind of savor every while. You're not supposed to kind of go through it.
Cheesecake. It's a cheesecake.
Yeah, cheesecake. Yeah, it's not something you just shove down your throat on purpose. It's something that you're
Oops, I
you're trying.
accidentally shoved cheesecake down my throat again.
Look,
Yeah, it's like
sometimes you
thing
get
you
hungry.
shouldn't shove down your throat on purpose. Yeah.
But yeah, basically, it's something that you're supposed to save. You're supposed to eat a little bit of it at a time, and you're supposed to savor it. And that's not if you're hungry, that's not what you want to eat. You want to eat something that will, like just get you full, and then it's perfectly fine. Like I'm not saying that one's better than the other, but I do appreciate a movie that's like a slow burn like that. It's like why I like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I fully admit that is a very slow burn.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have too much David Bowie at once. You have to like spread them out over 2 hours. You have to like have them bit by bit. Otherwise, you get labyrinth, and it's just like overload.
Yes.
Actually, he's not really that much in Labyrinth, is the thing.
My labyrinth drinking game would beg to
Oh, where he is, he shows up quite a bit, but it's like not as
Yeah.
prevalent as it might want you to believe.
Yeah. Which actually that is part of the reason, like part of the thing that I want to bring up because the thing that I find interesting is I mentioned earlier that the sound, like it's more that I kind of want to bring up the soundtrack as a concept, because you figure that you have David Bowie in this movie and how popular he was in Japan. You'd figure that he'd have like a musical part, like some involvement in it. He has zero musical involvement in it. And in fact, it's mentioned that his character cannot sing, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, it's actually Ryuichi Sakamoto who
Yep.
plays Captain Yanoi. Funny
who is
enough.
who is the musical guy. And in fact, there is actually because the thing that I want to bring up is also part of the reason why we're doing this, which is the main theme, which there is the instrumental version of the song is just usually referred to as theme of Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. But there is a vocal version of the theme, which is Forbidden Colors, which the vocalist on that is one David Sylvain, who is not, I don't think he's that popular in the West, but I'd imagine he is somewhat popular in Japan because he used to be the frontman of a band that was just called Japan. Um, uh, that song in general is also interesting in terms of the kind of themes of kind of repressed homosexuality, because the name Forbidden Colors is in fact referencing to a Japanese novel or Japanese 1953 novel that's also called Forbidden Colors, which is basically a novel that explores very similar topics. So I thought that was at least kind of interesting. And it's not something you'd kind of that's more of a trivia thing, but it's something that I really thought was neat. But yeah, the music in this game, the music in this movie is really good.
Oh, it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with who Ryuichi Sakamoto is, um, and why he is such a influence, specifically into video game music, Ryuichi Sakamoto was one of the founding trio or one of the three founding members of a band that was it started in the late 70s and early 80s called Yellow Magic Orchestra. Um, and they were like probably one of the premier Japanese synth pop bands, if you can even call it that. But they are very, very good and also very influential. And yeah, if I could have gotten Lack of Love to work, there was also another soundtrack that was done by Ryuichi Sakamoto that is also very good. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because that is it's just really good, and I feel it is a um it's often brought up, but it's one thing that I definitely want to highlight. Um, so yeah, with that, I think we've kind of gone into this a little bit already, but I think if you have any other thoughts that you want to bring up, we can talk about this. Torpo, how'd you feel about the settings and characters?
Setting is very interesting. It's not exactly something that's explored a whole lot, and it's also interesting knowing that the director is Japanese, so it really helps frame the commentary put forth by this movie. And B, that it's based off a novel of a man who was in one of these camps, and so this is what it was like from their eyes and what they went through. And so it sort of almost lends it a certain degree of legitimacy, which I appreciate. But the characters themselves, there are essentially the four main characters, which is Lawrence. Like there's some others who play large parts, but they aren't the central focus. And the four who are the central focus are Lawrence, which, as we mentioned, is the POW who can speak both English and Japanese and acts as both a mediator and a translator. There is Hara, who is I forget, what is he again? What is his rank?
He is a sergeant.
Yeah, Sergeant Hara, who's essentially the second in this camp, and has his own essential take on things, but is essentially friends with Lawrence. Him and Lawrence get pretty close over the course of the film, but even just at the beginning have this sort of established rapport between the two of them, to the point where Lawrence will even talk up to him and like yell at him about certain things, and feels comfortable doing so, which is a lot. But there's those two who are essentially witness to, I guess you call it, the madness that is between Genoi and Selliers, who are essentially the two instigators in the camp that lead to everything that goes down. And so you've got Lawrence. Where you guys?
Oh, this is a yeah.
But yeah, essentially, so Lawrence himself is a British soldier. Pretty sure he's British.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they've changed the soldiers to British.
In the book, he was South African.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about specifically though in the movie. In the context of the movie, all the soldiers are
yes,
mostly they're mixed, but largely British.
Yep.
And he's basically trying to reconcile these two cultures almost, and both try to understand, but also try to get the Japanese, but especially Hara, to understand his point of view. Whereas Hara's basically trying to do his job and doesn't quite understand why the Brits have been acting the way they do, but also seems to want to do right by his own people, if nothing else, or those he cares about. Like, once again, him essentially putting someone else up on the block for Lawrence's sake to actually save him, to the point where he is absolutely trashed and yelling, "I'm Santa, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. Merry Christmas, Lawrence." Excuse me. He doesn't call him Mr. until actually the end. I don't know if that's deliberate, but I think it's an interesting touch.
I think it's because at the end he says it in English, and
yeah,
during the drunk the trunk moment in the middle of the movie, he says in Japanese. So that's why he doesn't say Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah. Also, I feel like it helps establish the dynamic and how it changes between the two of them by the end, and the difference of position. Yeah. So I actually really like the two of them, and I think they worked really well together, if I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, they really had a good rapport.
Yeah, the chemistry between the two actors seemed pretty solid, and I appreciate that. And just in general, the both of them are just trying to get their jobs done and do right by their own people in the middle of all that goes down. Because then you have Selliers and Yanoi. Selliers is uh, a British soldier who earned the nickname Strafer, which is still hilarious.
Circle strafe, circle strafe.
Circle strafe, circle strafe. It's the best way to defeat an enemy in a video game. I've learned this. But yeah, he's essentially the idea behind him is like sort of the indomitable spirit. Like he refuses to be broken and will never back down to these people keeping him and his people prisoner here in this camp. So he repeatedly spits in their eyes, repeatedly goes against them, and oftentimes is an instigator because he refuses to be put down by everything around him. To the point where he gets imprisoned repeatedly and also beaten to shit repeatedly. It's also a quick interesting thing about Selliers is it seems like there's a lot of camera angles that they try to draw attention to Bowie's really striking eyes.
Yeah.
At least to me.
There's
Because they don't.
There's a big change from Labyrinth, where in Labyrinth they always draw attention to his crotch.
Yeah, yeah.
His
It
eyes
feels
are
like
up
there's a
here.
lot done to draw attention to the appearances of Selliers in Yanoi almost, but and so Bowie's character is essentially doing all this, but slowly realizing what's going on, which I'll get to in a second. And so the other is Yanoi, who is this at first very by the books Japanese captain, who is immediately taken by Bowie's character, but doesn't understand any of it or what's going on. And over the course of the movie, as Bowie's still constantly spitting in his face, essentially, has a breakdown and is slowly losing his mind, basically being more and more cruel, not just to his own men, but also to the POWs, especially to the POWs, to the point where he has the injured also come walking out uh, in the middle of the day to stand there for a speech he was going to give.
Let's say, and the sick, which leads to one of them dying.
Yes, and the sick, which leads to one of them dying. And it was a particularly cruel measure, but this man just doesn't understand what he's going through or what's happening, and he just can't seem to reconcile any of it in his mind. Until eventually Bowie it seems to get an understanding of what's happening and goes right up to him, hugs him, and goes cheek to cheek with him, which eventually instigates the final meltdown of Yanoi, where he loses his fucking mind and has Bowie buried under sand, except for his head, which is stuck out in the sun.
Well, it wasn't Yanoi who had him buried. It was the guy who takes over for Yanoi, because Yanoi gets replaced.
Oh, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because,
okay.
because that's like basically Yonoi loses like power and respect because of that.
Yeah, the big move and just him losing it. And it isn't until after Bowie's dead that he seems to finally have an understanding what was going on. Unfortunately, it took him so long, and he ends up cutting off a lock of Bowie's hair, which after the end, like in the ending, Lawrence even mentions that he was going to take that hair to Yanoi's village and burn it at his family shrine.
Yeah, that was a interesting thing. Like right at the very end, they just walks up to Bowie and just cuts off a lock of his hair, while
just
he is very clearly just out of it. I know it's supposed to be kind of horrifying that he's just gradually dying, but it is also just a smidge humorous of him
the
just getting.
makeup is ridiculous.
Yeah,
It actually, the entire time, I couldn't stop thinking about the couple scenes from Caligula.
But
The
yeah,
people
Yeah.
buried up to their necks.
so at least I found that interesting, is that like his final wish, because he was also put to the block for obvious
War crimes, obvious
yeah,
reasons.
war crimes, was to have that hair burnt in his family shrine. And if nothing else, at the very end, it seemed like he made peace with himself.
Only took a
or
bunch
whatever
of
the-
dead people.
Yeah, it only took a bunch of dead people. They literally buried their
up to the neck.
up to the neck.
Could be biased.
Also,
Don't know.
repeatedly, I feel it worth mentioning. He also takes his frustration out on Bowie by beating him
Oh yeah,
and fighting
maybe
against him.
he beats a lot of people though.
He does. But it's like he genuinely doesn't seem to understand what's happening until it's far, far, far too late.
Yeah. Um.
Also, fun fact: Bowie's character was originally South African.
Yep. All right. That it?
Yeah.
All right. Bear.
I think we mostly covered like the bulk of it. I do think that we definitely have the pairings of in terms of character interaction of like Lawrence and Hara and Sailors and Yunoi. I kind of thought that Lawrence and Hara was a bit more interesting because it's like an interaction I'm more familiar with in terms of when you have people from different cultures who don't know much about each other's culture, and then like this one like person wants to just show the other how they do it. So you kind of like see it at the very start when Hara orders for Lawrence to be brought over um, to like witness the guard committing seppuku. And it's like Lawrence is like what the fuck? Why did you bring him here? Uh, and I think it's like constantly Hara because he can talk to Lawrence, and because Lawrence is instead of being this random POW that he can just yell at, it's actually someone he can talk to and learn more from. So to him, it's also teach Lawrence more about the Japanese, and I think that's like a very human interaction. Like I've seen like I guess being in Europe, it's more easier to see examples of that. But like whenever you have people from foreign countries, if they don't know much about each other's country, you're gonna show like, oh, this is how we do our food. This is how we make our drinks. Oh, this is how we do our thing, or how we build our houses and like stuff like that. It's always interesting to show. So it's like a very human reaction, and I kind of like that.
Yeah. The relationship between the two does feel very natural.
Yeah. It also kind of like aligns with anecdotes I know from World War II. Like my late grandfather befriended a Italian POW during World War II who was a doctor. And I think there was still like a language barrier there, but they managed to somehow communicate. But it's just it's a very human reaction, even though you're at war with somebody or you're somebody's like they're your captor, or you're responsible for like keeping them in captivity. There's sometimes like this still human interaction despite it. I guess kind of like the contemporary equivalent to that is mostly um, prison, which isn't anything close to that. But during war, nobody wants to be there. Nobody wants to take like really part in like straight up war. So it makes sense. It's a plausible thing in my mind to have them interact like that. So I did like that. I felt it was very authentic. There's some Sailors and um, I almost feel like that was like moving um like things forward. Like Sailors kind of felt like it didn't feel like he had much opportunity for character growth in terms of he kind of reflects on the flashback on how how he basically threw his brother under the bus essentially. But he's kind of like he feels like he's miserable, he's defiant, and he almost feels like he doesn't really have he doesn't really have like any self-preservation in mind. Almost like he doesn't really care about the consequences, and that almost feels like a concept from the start of the movie uh, all the way to the end. But also he doesn't like authority. So it's kind of like this weird thing of like I don't care what happens to me. Like when he smuggles in food, he says like, "Oh, I'll take responsibility for that." When he goes and kisses Yonoi to save Hixley from being executed, like at near the end of the movie, he doesn't really like care about what will happen to him. So he has this kind of self-destructive side to it,
Uh,
but he also has this like not spiteful, but kind of like he doesn't like oppressors. So that's why he doesn't accept the ruling at the start in his trial that he should be executed. It's why he kind of spites his captors all the time as well.
A broken man who refuses to be broken.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like that. Like it feels like I don't care about myself, but I'm not gonna give you the satisfaction of like doing something to me. Um,
It's funny you
yeah,
mentioned that also because going back to the flashback, he actually does mention fairly quickly though, as he's starting it, is that he doesn't really have any sort of good experience with human relationships or anything like that. And he's only really known how to betray, which says a lot to who he is in sort of his ego in general,
yeah,
or lack thereof, really.
but it is kind of interesting where when he escapes his cell, he still goes to save Lawrence when he's uh giving everybody food and the flowers. He's not doing that. You know, in one part he's doing that because people shouldn't be hungry, and in the other part he's doing that because the person who died, the Dutch soldier, like deserves some form of like memorial, and he gets nothing from that. Like he's not
Yeah,
doing that to be particularly popular. So he does have so he had he I think he understands, like, in at least in the camp, maybe not before like he was um in prison, but he kind of like understands, like, yeah, like people can suffer and they shouldn't suffer. But he did say that he went to war, like the war was the first time he kind of felt alive or something along those
yeah,
lines. And then Lawrence asked him, "Oh, why didn't you just sign up for the French Foreign Legion?" And he was something like, "Oh, that's not the same." So I think it's more like, yeah, the chaos of the war erupted and kind of put the life to a standstill, and that kind of gave him the excuse to like embrace it. Whereas if he was in the French Foreign Legion, he would kind of just go wherever there's conflict all the time, rather than like this global chaos that happened.
yeah. He even mentioned that he was like sort of just floating along as a relatively successful lawyer, but he was so
Yeah,
estranged from his brother at that point, and he felt bad for just missing out on so much of his life.
but you kind of feel like he's on this like trajectory of self destruction, and
Complete self-destruction.
yeah, and there's never really anything in the movie that like diverts him from that trajectory. Like he's he's basically going headfirst into uh danger, but he's trying to stay alive while doing it, like for as long as possible, I guess, like by some other actions. So in that part, I think like he's interesting as like a driving force, but it's kind of a shame that he doesn't really like get on like on his head. He doesn't get any closure. He doesn't get any like character development. I don't think he ever, because like the main thing that burdens him is his relationship with his brother, and he kind of gets this as he dies, like this dying memory where he like in that memory gets closure with his brother, like which he would want to have, like if he came back from the war. But he never actually gets that.
Yeah, it seemed to hang over him like some sort of specter.
Yeah,
Much of it, and but what I meant by the lack of human relationships and like only knowing betrayal is it felt like he said that sort of to emphasize his lack of attachment to anything.
yeah, yeah.
Because especially after Lawrence had just gone on this A mentioning his wife, and yeah, just going on the speech about the woman who was at the hotel in Singapore.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, in terms of like Captain Yanoi, again, I think he kind of falls in like the similar category to Lawrence, where he's also on this self-destruction like trajectory, or rather like mutually assured destruction with Celliers. Um, so like he at least gets some closure, but it's very shitty closure because
Yeah,
a bunch of innocent people died and Celliers dies, and then he's like, "Oh, I finally made peace with my emotions." And it's like, yeah, but it kind of feels shit considering how much you fucked up in the process. Like he loses his status, he loses somebody he actually fell in love with. He costs a lot of people their lives. Uh, it kind of just becomes a massive mess. So it doesn't really even
and is
feel
eventually put to the block.
yeah.
So
So that's why I think like Lawrence and Hara are the more interesting ones, because by observing this like trajectory of chaos and destruction, they grow from that, like to some extent, I feel. and from their interaction with each other, they kind of grow. But you never really see Yonoi and Sailors be allowed to reach that point, and that's kind of like the tragic part of all of this. That like they don't get anything out of this. They get the shittiest deal, both of them.
Actually, funny enough, I feel worth mentioning that the Dutch soldier and the Japanese soldier scene at the very beginning sort of highlights the central, almost conflict of the film, in itself. Because it's not just that they're taken and beaten to shit. It's they get talked out of it. Well, not they get talked out of it. The soldiers get talked out of it. The Japanese soldiers get talked out of uh, fucking over the Dutch guy, and also the Japanese guy is still meant to commit suicide, but they have a bigger showing of it when they do.
Also, I do want to point out just it's a little nitpick. He's technically Korean.
Oh, Korean. Excuse me. Yes, sorry about that.
Yeah,
but yes,
go ahead.
it's and for the longest time, the Dutch soldiers claiming, "No, I feel nothing towards him. There's nothing between us. Nothing like that." During the scene where the Korean soldier is actually committing ritual suicide, the Dutch soldier jumps out and starts screaming and crying and losing his mind over what's happening.
Yeah, and he bites his tongue and kills himself that way.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That is kind of meant there to highlight, essentially, very quote unquote subtly, what's going to happen in the rest of the movie in terms of like Sailors and Yonoi.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all meant.
All right, Axe.
So I mean, it's set during World War II. It's a war film, and it's very powerful. You know, I have my couple hangups, but we know why I have those hangups, and the setting is really impactful for everything that happens. It's all very claustrophobic, despite them being in basically a village. Like they have lots of open space to do things, but they can't unless they're being herded around to do specific stuff. So there's this weird sense of claustrophobia throughout the film, which I feel kind of actually helps with the relationships in terms of Hara and Lawrence, who are easily the most interesting part of the film. And I think it's obviously done that way for a reason. Lawrence and Hara are sort of like Torpid said, they're the third party watching this cascade of chaos happening around them, and it directs their lives in different ways. Hara is specifically sort of coming to terms, not being able to come to terms with what he did, but really just coming to terms with his own mortality. And Lawrence just trying to come to terms with the senselessness of everything and not being able to, even with that was the other thing that struck me too, is everywhere Lawrence went, there's nothing but senselessness, and he was trying so desperately hard to hold himself together in the middle of all of it, including the end, when Hara is being put to death for the things that he did. And in Hara's mind, it doesn't make any sense. So even in the final moments, Lawrence is faced with the senselessness of war, and it's a really great bit of subtext to the overall story. And then it's interesting how they kept Sailors and Yonoi distanced from each other, sort of playing into that whole thing of what Yonoi was feeling. It wasn't returned, but Yonoi was feeling this forbidden sense, this longing for Sailors, and that distance between them throughout the movie, where we barely get to spend that time with them like we do with Lawrence and Hara, it directly affects their dynamic, and is played out specifically in how much time each of them has with one another. It's also interesting. Torpid mentioned the focus on Bowie's eyes, and in a lot of the scenes where we had both uh, Bowie and Ricci,
Ryuichi.
Ryuichi,
Yunoi is the yeah.
Yunoi, in those scenes where we had both of them together, there's lots of close-ups of both of their faces whenever it was trying to deal with one or the other. So,
Also, really
Hmm?
quick, I forgot to mention. It also looks like Yunoi Ryuichi had makeup that seemed to emphasize his eyes as well.
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, but it's very interesting that they chose those camera angles to very much focus on Bowie. Bowie, whenever he was in scene, it was very much focused on his face. But with Ryuichi, it didn't do that unless Bowie was also in that scene, and then they put a lot of emphasis on his face as well, and it felt like they were, trying to sort of, the symbolism behind that, just like the way that the two of them are connected, despite them not truly knowing that they are connected, um, or just basically, symbolizing, Yonoi's gaze on Lawrence, or not Lawrence, Celius.
Yeah, I
But
think it's more of the latter personally, but I also think it's like you can kind of see whenever there's a close up of his eyes, you kind of also see him kind of lose his composure because whenever Celius is not there, he's this like authority figure,
Yeah.
like highly strung and everything. But like even though he doesn't, he doesn't like lose that bodily composure like when Celius is there, but you can see it in his eyes that like he loses his composure.
and there's a bit of you can notice it a bit in his body language, just kind of like he's a little more relaxed around him, um, and it definitely is just like he's not as in control of any situation when Celius is around. A good example is the flower scene when he's just eating the flower in front of him, and you just see in his eyes like he can't handle this. This is too much. His systems are overloading. But their relationship and their characters weren't meant to be. Uh, I don't feel like they were meant to be the highlight. They were meant to be more uh, auxiliary.
Yeah, auxiliary is a good word.
Auxiliary. They're there to kind of drive the madness, and bringing. He's almost kind of like Jack Nicholson's character from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, um, which I believe came out later.
I think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I believe that was 60s or 70s. I will take a look.
But just that's what the impression I got off of him was very similar to that character. His arrival signaled a drastic change in his environment, and that's what Bowie's characters is he's just there as sort of this driving force, um, and Lawrence and Hara are there to witness these things. Lawrence in specific, to witness them and record them, to remember them. Since of all the people in this film, he's the one who gets out with probably the best ending. Whereas
He's
everybody,
the survivor.
yeah, he's the survivor basically. So, I mean, you know, it. What more can I really say that hasn't already been said about these characters? It is a good film, and I think I'll just kind of cut myself off there.
Yeah. There's two things that I wanted to point out from what you said. One, I did check. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest the film was from 1975. Um, you were mentioning the claustrophobia because it seemed like they had all that space that they didn't use much. That was also something that David Bowie mentioned or noted that when he started to work on the film, and he realized that that was actually the reason why they were all clustered together was actually one that the director was intentionally using, and he realized that, and he also thought that it was a good touch. Um, but yeah, I basically any thoughts I would have are basically just repeating pretty much what everyone said. Yeah, I really enjoy the setting is really powerful. Like it is a really good rendition of a Japanese POW camp, and the characters are very interesting in this. It does seem like there are basically four main characters, but there are um, those four are actually very good. I really like their characterization. Um, so yeah, um, and I think we've kind of gone on. We've kind of brought this up a little bit. But Axe, how do you feel about this being a joint Japanese Western produced movie?
I mean, it's good. Uh, I don't, I think it works. It works because I'm not sure how to really answer this question, to be quite honest. I know what I want to say, and it was mentioned before. How it being being I think it was produced or was it directed by a Japanese person,
Japanese
Directed.
director.
Yep.
Japanese director, and there's a lot of influence in it in terms of trying to portray things not as biased. Like it feels like there's a good balance because it's from two different sides of it. Um, and I think having it be a joint production really helped keep it in more of a grounded and uh fair production, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And yeah, I definitely agree with that. Bear.
Yeah, I think like it could only have been made as a joint venture, to be honest, because I don't. It's very problematic when you're dealing with um, World War II movies, because it's this is like what 83, yeah. So
83.
that's like that's still not like super long after World War II. There's still a lot of World War II movies being made. I mean, they I don't know if they ever really stopped making them. Probably like at the turn of the century, but um, like with World War II movies, it's very easy to fall into a trap of um, like turning it into propaganda, like regardless of the
Demonizing
topic.
one side.
Yeah, or demonizing one side, especially because it is very problematic depicting any like side as sympathetic. Like it's very difficult to like for example, like moving into the West, it's very hard to depict German soldiers from World War II as uh, people just like quote unquote doing their jobs or whatever, like regular folks who were wrapped up in the war. It's very difficult to do that. Uh, I think if this was like an American and Japanese joint venture, it would probably like gone in, like more far into one direction. Um, and also like post World War II Japan was very uh, influenced by this national shame of World War II, this like national failure, and a very like big influence from America and American culture. So I think approaching it this setting and these kind of characters uh, was only really possible in like a joint venture. I think having it be Japanese and UK was probably the good choice. Like I definitely think the director, like even if this was like fully produced somewhere else, like outside of Japan, definitely like you'd want the director to be Japanese and someone familiar, um, with the culture, with the national consciousness, so to say, the national attitude. Um, and it's a much better movie for us.
Okay. Turbo.
Yeah. So I agree, 100%. Another thing I might say, I mentioned it earlier, but like I also feel like this being a joint British Japanese venture, but also being based off of a book by someone who was in one of these POW camps, sort of lends it a certain degree of legitimacy to the sort of commentary and complaints it leverages against both the Japanese and the British in this case, because it definitely does bring up problems not with just one but with both. Like with we've gone into the Japanese side, but like a few of the complaints it leverages with the British are like the captain asking the world and being huge on empty gestures. Uh, their views on homosexuality, because like they even pointed out, like even Lawrence was getting uncomfortable in discussing it, and even saying like it's just wrong, that's bad. Whereas Howard was going like between samurai, that's perfectly fine. In like even the Dutch soldier denying it until the end when he finally lost it and bit his tongue because the Korean soldier was put to death. And also once again the Brits just putting these people to the block who without even them understanding what they did wrong or what it was. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it ends a certain air of legitimacy and makes it more meaningful as a whole. On top of it, makes like the complaints leveraged against the Japanese side feel a lot more impactful, knowing that the director is themselves Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like at the end, when like it's been said that the Japanese like higher ranking officers were put to trial, and Hara is being put to trial. You can kind of feel from Lawrence like it's not just, I think, about like, oh yeah, these people don't know what they did wrong and they're being put to trial for just living how they were taught to live, but I think it's also just in general a kind of commentary on post World War II, like these trials and executions, how it was essentially a lot of them were, um, like I don't think like matter of fact is the way to phrase it, but they were basically kind of like, yeah, we need to execute a lot of people
To maintain order.
to maintain order, essentially, because like even like post I brought up earlier, but like when I mentioned the trials, um, for Japanese soldiers like post World War II, um, a lot of those military officials that got executed and trialed, a lot of them did so to also protect the Japanese emperor, because the Japanese emperor never really answered for anything. And there was this one time, I can't remember the name of the Japanese general, but the infamous one, where he did mention the emperor, and they had to take him aside and tell him, "No, you can't mention the emperor. You have to take full responsibility for this." And he came back and took full responsibility for everything. So it's kind of like also, I think, kind of like maybe a subtle commentary on, yeah, like post World War II cleanup trials, how they were basically like, yep, a ton of people have died and were executed, and maybe not all of them should have been, executed like that.
Yeah. I know which one you're talking about. If I see the name, Tojo.
Tojo, yes, that's the one. Thank you.
Um, yeah. So yeah, I fully agree. Like the fact that it is a Japanese develop or like directed movie with some Western or British assistance does make this movie a lot better. I feel like that mix really lended it some. It really helped the movie. So I do feel like if it were, well, especially it helped that I think for most part the people involved in the story were mostly British and Japanese. I do feel like if you got any other nationality involved, it would be a little weird, even though the book were partially South African. But nonetheless, yeah, I do feel like that being a Japanese Western produced movie really did help it. And I think we'll just kind of go on to our last one because we kind of talked about the performances throughout the movie. Um, so Torbo, how do you feel about the general themes of this movie?
Um.
And I think
Oh man.
we've already talked about that a good amount. So
Yeah, I
I guess
don't know
we
what
can,
else to add, but if anyone else does, go ahead.
yeah, I think we could probably just add, kind of
I mean,
go on and
unless
add,
Bear Axe have something to say.
yeah,
Um, I like how it's a movie about pride in terms of gay pride, but also like more national ego-driven pride at the same time. So that's a double whammy, and it's also a movie about burying the gay thoughts, but also burying people as well near the end. when they bury Celliers. So yeah, very, very, very thematically sound, very interconnected. But no, I'm basically saying like, yeah, I already went over, I think, almost everything I wanted to, so I'm good.
All right, X.
I mean, yeah, no, we've covered pretty much everything. I can't think of. There's the themes of nationalism. There's themes of homosexuality. Dealing with latent homosexual urges. Um, there's symbolism, subtlety, subtext. There's lots of stuff in this movie. It's a very layered film, and yeah.
All right. Yeah, and I feel like we've kind of gone over the themes, but yeah, it does. The themes of this are very impactful, I guess, be one way to describe it. So yeah, I think we've kind of gone over a good amount of this movie. So I think we can actually get to ranking it. So uh, we are going to rank this using our normal 1 to 21 scale. If this is your first time listening, basically we have a 1 to 21 scale, with 1 being absolute genre mastercraft. It's very hard for it to get any better than what it already is. And 21 is basically, it's not even ironically fun to watch, or interesting to watch. It is just a slog and just bad in general. So Axe, what would be your number ranking for this?
Well, I tried to load up the list and it wouldn't load for me. But there we go. Well, let's see here. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna say 6.
6. Okay. Bear.
It's very like difficult. I haven't been in too many of these. It's very difficult for me to say something like, like 4 or 5, because then it'd be like, yeah, I do think the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie really did deliver more than
Oh,
Mr. Lawrence.
oh, just from
As a Bowie performance, how would you say it compares to Labyrinth?
Torpid, I was plastered half of Labyrinth because it was the same game. So I would have to rewatch that if I was right. But no, I don't think this is like something like a monumental movie. I've only like really heard about this movie like a few years ago from Lolo. So I didn't know much about it. I don't think it's like something that's like culturally, and I wouldn't say relevant, but like culturally monumental is a phrase I'd look for, like Die Hard Aliens. But I think it's a very good movie, despite some weird pacing. But I think it takes advantage of the pacing. So I'd say something like 5 probably.
Okay. Torpo.
Wow, I'm on the high end for once, huh? I was gonna say like maybe 3 or 4 personally,
Okay. Yeah, and
because I
that's
do think it's an absolutely fantastic film, but I wouldn't consider it the absolute pinnacle. But also, I think it's really fantastic.
yeah.
It just has some failings here and there that just keep it from being, in my opinion.
Yeah. So if you kind of do the division between like the different colors of the rainbow, where like you have 1 through 3 being like, you know, violet, indigo, and all that. Kind of we placed it right in the middle of the indigo, like 4, 5, and 6, which is kind of in general is the well above average area, which I feel that is kind of where I'd put it. Like, I think if I were to just give it a number myself, I would probably say 4 or 5. Um, I do feel like it might be good to kind of just because I'm just trying to think of, just because from what I've seen of that, I could either see I kind of think that because let me read the descriptions of 4 versus 5. 4, which was basically is labeled as absolute or almost mastercraft, high quality, but falls just short of being considered a masterpiece. Where 5 is it's just really good, probably has some small flaws or things that haven't aged well though. Um,
I wouldn't say like the movie has like major flaws in terms of like, oh, they could have done this better. I think it's just the it has pacing issues, but that's in terms of like a lot of, like, in my mind, like, modern viewing. I do think that the pacing does help the oppressive tone of it a lot, and I think that for the story they were going, especially because it's based on a novel, um, it doesn't have like the same how can I say, same dynamic you would expect from like something that's just directly a movie or something that's like more action oriented, like how Die Hard's based on like a crime novel.
Yeah. Um. So. Hmm. So yeah, I'm thinking like basically just splitting the middle of all of our votes, and just kind of going 5 or technically 4 or 5, if we did a raw average, or raw median, I should say. Excuse me, raw mean. If I,
Oh my
or-
god, choose your M word.
yeah,
Raw middle.
yeah, raw middle. Let's go with that.
Raw dog.
Um, yeah, because it's just the comparison of the East OVA versus Game Center CX Season 1.
That is literally an impossible comparison with this.
Mm-hmm. Because neither one of them, it really fits.
Merry Christmas, Reno.
Yeah.
I mean, Game Center CX, but this Alex Kidd, so I'd put this above it. That's gonna push me to the edge. I can just say 4 and make it easier.
Okay. Then I guess at that point we can do 4. Let's see. Okay, 4. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence.
I'm glad I managed to base even this list on Alex Kidd's ranking.
Yep. And this is episode 32. Came out in 1983. Director is Nagisa Oshino. Paste values. This was a theatrical release. This was a drama.
War
Boy,
drama.
howdy was it.
I would say that the tone of this is sad.
Oh, fucking tragic.
Sad, war sad.
War is hell.
I don't know if there's really anything to put in content.
Dude,
Come
Who
on.
is it?
bro.
Yeah,
literally starts with a fucking seppuku attempt,
Okay,
like
Okay.
fucking
Yeah.
heavy as shit.
yeah, it is.
It's
It is
rated
definitely-
R. It's officially rated R.
Yeah, it's just because it's not like, oh, okay, I will give it the gore because there's a lot of seeing like these scars on people.
And dudes cutting themselves. Like,
Yeah,
Being tortured and
Yeah,
starved.
there's some genuinely hard to watch scenes.
yeah.
the thing, and that's actually one thing that I do kind of like about it is that it gets the impact of like the seppuku and like the like killings, without being like gory, which I feel is actually kind of refreshing.
Yes, but also they're still genuinely uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like Lolo, we're talking about a movie where an entire high school or university or whatever bullying a single child for having a
Actually,
hump
yeah,
is less heavy than most of the other heavy scenes.
yeah, actually, that's a good point because I have this, so this gets an A. So I think AG because I'm just looking at the things that I have. Oh yeah, I just remember what the star for Running Man is, and I got to think of that. That's for a different day. So, is there anything do we want to call it for music, charm, cinematography, storytelling / drama, action, and art?
I would
Music.
say, yeah, music. I'd also say cinematography
Yeah,
and storytelling / drama.
yeah, I can give that.
Well, we were kind of divided on that because I do agree, like the pacing is a bit weird, even if the actual story is,
Yeah.
Well, the pacing
Good.
there's something else we'll bring up for pacing. Yeah, I think that's probably good because it's definitely not action. And I feel like charm is not something that.
No.
Yeah, I don't
No.
think I would not call charm something that I would bring up. Let's see, yay or nay. We did talk about pacing, which is the one that's
Wasn't
specifically
it
about pacing.
snail, and then ruler?
Yeah, I think it's snail. Well,
It's a long film.
it
and
yeah,
it
snail
wears.
and ruler. Yeah,
It
snail
is.
and
It is a
ruler.
very long film. Yeah.
If Red October got the ruler, this is getting the ruler too.
Yeah, what is
Oh,
this,
yeah.
like 2 hours and change?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 2 hours. It's 2 hours and 3 minutes. How much
Yeah.
what was Red October?
I think that was 2.5.
Yeah, I think that was like October because I just want to like I not to like prove anything. I'm just curious because that was IMDb is saying that was 135 minutes, which is like 10 minutes longer.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
well, so the next thing you need to do is you need to play those bootleg Bible video games, and then we need to watch King of Kings for Media Delta because that's like 2 hours and 50 minutes.
I mean, if we do, there's got to be a game based off of like Moses.
Well, this
Like,
is Jesus Christ.
yeah, I was gonna say because there's the Bible Adventures game. We could do the 10 Commandments, which is like
There we
5
go.
hours long.
Yeah.
Or we could do any Romance of the Three Kingdoms game. We could do the full cut of Red Cliff, which I have on Blu-ray.
So for Yay, can you add a sparkle emoji for David Bowie?
I
I
can.
mean, come on, that's
Actually, for a story, should it be a thumbs up or should it be good characters?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Good characters.
yeah, it should be good characters.
Is there just a?
If you have a
There.
David Bowie emoji, that can also work.
There is no David Bowie, but I can do a star.
Okay,
Starman. Yeah. So yeah, there we go. There's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. As they say, our probably most nebulously connected to video games movie that we will do up until next month, in which we do Chariots of Fire.
You're gonna after this, you're gonna put some ice on your shoulder.
Also, part of me was hoping for the longest time that would just be me and Lolo on Chariots of Fire. Because for a long time it was only the two of us signed up.
Well, it was the same way with this. It was just you and Lolo, and I signed up because it's like that'll
Yep.
be over very quick.
Yeah.
Joke's on you.
I'll be back for the next World War II thing, so don't you worry.
Oh right. Yes.
Don't forget
That's got to come up for that though.
Got to put the star on Labyrinth in too.
Oh right. I suppose.
Yeah, I can't
I
believe you
suppose.
went there.
Can't play favorites.
No, we have the eggplant for Labyrinth. We could put there the star eggplant.
Star eggplant. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. I asked the question, Lolo, because you reached so fucking hard to get this on here.
You know, at some point, just calling shot in the future. We're just gonna do whatever the hell we want. At some point. I'm
Yeah.
fine with
I
that.
mean, at least we've actually done a game related to next week's.
Yeah, we have. Which
I'm the one who requested it.
yeah, which actually, speaking of, before we talk about that, now that we have kind of exhausted Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, X,
Merry Christmas.
is there anything you want to plug?
Just my stream, twitch.tv/AxeImmortal.
Okay, Bear.
Twitch.tv/RealSovietBear.
Okay, Torpo.
Twitch.tv/TorpidTypist and @TorpidTypist on Twitter, and I don't feel comfortable making a joke about this one.
Yeah. So next week, we have a very different, still a somewhat deeper movie than the kind of thing that we've been doing. Which actually, now that I think about it, that was another reason why I wanted to do this movie, because we've been looking at a bunch of bullshit recently.
Are you
so
saying that The Running Man isn't deep?
So I wanted to get a little bit of a palate cleanser.
How do y'all feel about transhumanism?
Yeah, because next week we're talking about Ghost in the Shell, which is much more action-based, but also still pretty deeper than most action movies, because it is a Mamoru Oshii film. So
You know what? Still not as navel-gazy as the sequel is.
yeah, also some of the Pat Labor movies.
Let me tell you about fucking Bato waxing philosophical for an hour and a half.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, that will do it for this episode. So thank you all for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye.
If you would like to look at the full list of rankings for yourself, please visit r3.ldp.life and go to the Media Delta list tab. If you would like to watch Media Delta's sister show, Retro Rank Rhapsody, you can either watch at youtube.ldp.life or by tuning into twitch.tv/LoadedPuzzlo at 7:30 p.m. on Fridays, 2:30 p.m. on Saturdays, and 1 p.m. on Sundays. All those times are from the Eastern US time zone. If you would like to discuss this episode with the community, you can do so by joining our Discord server, which you can do so by going to discord.ldp.life. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you tune in for our next episode.